So hello, everyone. Welcome to our conversation. Today, we have a fantastic session lined up for you, and we're going to be discussing the theme of actually staying ahead of anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations with your community. So we've got some really, really wonderful brains and hearts that are going to be joining us in this session. And I want to start by introducing myself. So my name is Kai Kafferson. I go by the pronouns she, her, and I am an account manager at ThoughtExchange. And I'm joining you today from my home on the traditional and unceded territory of the Ktunaxa, Sinixt, and Syilx peoples. And that's also known as Rossland, BC in Canada. And I see that we have a wonderful group of folks from across North America today. So welcome and thank you for joining us. So as we wade into this conversation, I just want to start by naming my own privileges that I bring to this space as being a white woman who lives in Canada, and to really name the responsibility that I feel with that of being a co-conspirator and actively working to dismantle these systems that I benefit from. So I want to humbly offer that I'm coming to you all on this journey, and to also name that ThoughtExchange is on this journey as well, and that we're learning and we're stumbling and we're growing. So a big thank you to all of you for joining us and joining us on your different ways in this journey and with your different experiences that you're coming with. So with that, we're so lucky to have Dr. Dennis Carpenter. And Dennis is an absolutely wonderful human being that I feel incredibly lucky to be working with and learning from. And he comes with an illustrious and impactful career in education as an educator and as a superintendent, and at various different levels within that spectrum. And we're lucky enough to have him join us at ThoughtExchange as the head of anti-racism, diversity, and equity in K-12. So Dennis is going to be hosting our conversation today, and he'll be introducing our wonderful panelists. So I will turn it over to Dennis.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kai. And I so appreciate your support, your leadership, and the work that you do in this area for our great organization. And in my short time with ThoughtExchange, you have made me better, and I'm honored to serve next to you. Wow, this is an exciting day. A few days ago, we had about 30 participants signed up, and as of this morning, we were approaching 100 participants for this very, very important conversation. Today, we're here to lean into this notion of staying ahead of diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations in your community. That can be a difficult task. If you don't believe that can be a difficult task, then just Google yours truly. It can be very, very difficult. But here's what we know. I had a mentor to share with me once. He said, as a leader, Dennis, you have to stay far enough ahead of your organization so that they know you are leading, but you also have to stay close enough so that they can access you when they need you. So you need to be accessible, but you also need to be far enough ahead to demonstrate your leadership. And never has that bit of knowledge been more important than with conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would tell you that when leaders do this effectively, the job can still be challenging. And when it's not effective, you may not stand a chance of getting the result that oftentimes we all want. So we're excited to have two experts with us, Dr. Teresa Lance. She brings a wealth of experience to the role, having served as superintendent, and now she gets to work as an assistant superintendent for equity and innovation in School District U46 in Illinois. And Art Mccoy. Art Mccoy, a longtime person who's been entrenched in this work. Most recently, he's serving, of course, as superintendent in the Jennings School District in Missouri. And Doc had a very, very exciting announcement that I may let him share with the group as he leans into his 5 minutes of fame today. I have never been in this space that we call education and a place called school, where the work we do as leaders has been more important. We've seen the racial unrest and the fallout over the course of the last several months, whether it be from murders, state sanctioned, that we've worked through as a country and we continue to work through, whether it be the divisive presidential election, or whether it be the inequities that were exposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. And all of that gets placed upon your doors, our doors, as educational leaders. And if we refuse to have those conversations and act like those things aren't happening, I'm going to submit to you that there's a conversation happening anyway. You're just not being a part of it. And when you're not a part of that conversation as a leader and as an organization that's so important to your community, the school district, you have no ability to influence outcomes in that conversational space. You have no ability to respond to the greatest needs in your community. That's why it's important to have these conversations, but they have to be had in an effective way. I thought when I was serving in my most recent superintendency about a year and a half ago, I thought that we were having these conversations in an effective way. I always prided myself on being transparent to a fault and holding those issues up to the community that I believe to be most important. But we also learned that in this age of polarization and tribalism, there's some conversation that those who benefit from the system in its current construct, they simply do not want to have. And as a leader, you come to what I call a moral crossroads. And that moral crossroads says, do I experience comfort in not leaning into this conversation because my longevity might be tied to doing it that way? My day-to-day stress might be tied to me doing it that way. But the moral dilemma is we're data focused. We pride ourselves on being data rich, data focused environments. And when we lean into that data, we learn that if we take the easier route, we do it on the backs of young people. We do it on the backs of the most marginalized young people. So the opportunity is for us to lean into the conversation, but do it with an effective cadence. So I've had an opportunity over the last year and a half to really reflect on a conversation I had in a community around this very topic that went on to gain international attention. A conversation that brought death threats to my family. A conversation that required me to have a security presence when my kids got on and off the bus each day. And if I had it to do over again, I submit to you that I would have the same conversation. But I also submit to you that I called on ThoughtExchange to help me develop a cadence. And if I had it to do over again, I would have called on them earlier to lean into that cadence. See, I thought I was doing all of the right things. We're taught to have a 90-day entry plan. We're taught to have that plan be data rich. And when that plan shows glaring inequities or discrepancies or disproportionality, we stand it up and we face our community with a plan. But in this polarized society that we live in today, there's so many not ready for that conversation. But it's integral, it's important, it's necessary, but cadence matters. So when I made a decision about whether or not to go back into the superintendency or not, I was approached by ThoughtExchange. And I said, I can do this in one community and maybe right some wrongs, community wrongs, organizational wrongs, maybe even my wrongs, and try to get it right. Or I can try to influence this work on a broader scale, a more global scale, if you will. We show up today as an intracontinental learning community. And we show up around work that's adaptive in nature that none of us have solved for effectively before. Because had it been solved for, we all would have adopted, will have adopted it by now, and we'd be moving forward. So it's adaptive in nature because it's requiring us to use muscle we don't often use. It's requiring us to develop skills that may not be in our existing repertoire. So we lean on each other as a learning community. And we're going to start this learning community conversation with one of the best in this area that I know in the business. And that's Dr. Teresa Lance. Give it up for Dr. Teresa Lance.
Well, Dr. Carpenter, you said so much. I just don't even like going after you. You're just an incredible individual. But let me just say just humbled every time ThoughtExchange reaches out to me, asking me to lend my voice in this space. I've shared with you before, Dr. Carpenter, how instrumental you were to me. So as a former superintendent, Dr. Carpenter spoke to folks not being ready to have this conversation. So as I struggled in my superintendency, not knowing Dr. Carpenter, I just followed his story. So if you don't know his story, Google his story. But I followed his story, and on a whim, I reached out to Dr. Carpenter via Twitter, everybody, via Twitter, and asked him for help. And he was right there. I shared with Dr. McCoy. He doesn't even remember me. He thinks that he's so old that he taught me while I was in high school. I had to tell him I'm older than him. But about 6-7 years ago, I was in a session with Dr. Carpenter, and he just blew my mind with his, just how eloquent he was in his work and wanting to eradicate inequities then, and spoke about his background as a mathematician. So he doesn't know that, but I've been watching him too. So I'm honored to be in a space with these two gentlemen. And of course, ThoughtExchange, they were my partners 2 years ago, and I continue to call them not just partners, but friends in the work. So this DEI, this space is not new. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I started here in U46 July 1st. And I will say that this position existed prior to my arrival. Unfortunately, there was an untimely passing of my predecessor. So U46 was one of those districts that was on the cutting edge in terms of recognizing that they had to get in this space and do something fundamentally different. But U46 was one of few districts that was in that space, because prior to the pandemic, there was a 60% reduction in DEI officers, a 60% reduction. However, since the brutal killing of George Floyd, there has now been an increase of 50% DEI officers. So we often work reactively as opposed to proactively, thinking about doing the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So here I am in U46, and I have this title of Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Innovation. But what I would say to you, if you are thinking about doing this work, but that this is not a one-person job. It is never never created for one person to do the work. Because with this work comes enormous stress, personal and professional sacrifice. Ask me how I know. Ask Dr. Carpenter how he knows. So I've been blessed thus far in U46 that there's a board that really touts doing this equity work. And then I have colleagues in the district who also serve as co-conspirators with me in doing the work. And so there's at least 2 of us that we get together every Friday and we just talk about what are the things that we're wrestling with. We serve as thought partners in this work. But you didn't hear me, you didn't come to hear about my thought processes, but let me just tell you what I did. Upon my arrival in U46, I knew that if I came just pointing out the glaring inequities in U46, I instantly would have turned everyone off. So I started by just asking questions. I met with cabinet members, including the superintendent, and I asked them 3 questions. They all got the same questions. What are the strengths? What are the opportunities? And then this last question was, what are the greatest inequities in our district? The greatest inequity. And I was hoping that there would be some pattern or theme that emerged. But after asking 11 individuals, there was no commonality. They all had something different. So that meant I had to keep asking and I had to keep digging. So I continued to ask these questions. I dug into both quantitative and qualitative data. So I looked at policies. I looked at our disproportionality as it relates to suspension and placing students in special education. And those inequities existed. I also took time to meet with our union president. And still, no theme emerged, except one. And this one theme that emerged was around not just recruiting staff of color, but retaining staff of color. Here's why. We have more than 37,000 students in our district, more than 4,000 staff members. We have more than 70% of our students are students of color. 71% of our staff are white. The inequities exist not just in suspension, but in academic outcomes. Why is that? And I would profess that because there's a lack of cultural awareness, cultural proficiency, and cultural competency. But again, I just can't come out and say that. So what are some of the things that I've done? So again, since my arrival, there was already an equity committee that was in place. But unfortunately, as a result of the pandemic and the untimely passing of my predecessor, some of that equity work stopped. That meant that some of the equity members dropped off. So I launched another call to committee to solicit more individuals to participate in our equity work. That gave us about 65 new members to engage in equity work. And we have since, I've divided them up into 4 pillars with a plethora of data to begin to analyze, with the goal that at the end of the year, we will have new pillars, new marching orders for what the work should be. In other words, there's shared understanding for how we begin to engage. And it's not just Teresa directing the work. The other thing is that because there was this lack of safe and brave spaces for staff of color, I also launched Affinity Groups. Now there's a little bit of controversy around Affinity Groups, but I believe that that space was needed for staff of color to have space that they can process through and feel like they have the individuals who relate to them to think through and feel supported. So there are several affinity groups that we launched: African American, Latinx, Asian, LGBTQ, and white allyship. You will be amazed that the majority of our members are sitting in the white allyship group, which is really promising because it says to me that there are really good people who want to do this work. They want to learn about their privileges and biases to eradicate some of the inequities that exist in our system. And just recently, we launched an RFP. So we've launched an RFP with the goal of engaging in an equity audit. So we are looking for someone to come into our organization and peel back the layers. And peel back the layers, not just around discipline, around academic outcomes, but what do discrepancies look like in our curriculum department, in our teaching and learning. So we're looking for help. So again, it's not Teresa saying, here are the strengths and here are the opportunities, but we got outside folks willing to help us do it. And then last, but certainly not least, because I want to give some time for my colleague, Dr. McCoy, but in order to do this work, it can't just be at the classroom level. So I have worked with the superintendent to say, everybody on cabinet has to be learning. There has to be shared meaning and understanding in this work. We can't profess to be about equity And yet as cabinet members, we sit back. So we have just launched the opportunity to engage with an external partner where we will meet monthly to build our repertoire around equity, implicit biases, and systemic areas of oppression that we either control or we are turning a blind eye to. So I'll stop there because I want to give opportunity for Dr. McCoy and then questions of you. Excuse me, from you, sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Lance. Shared meaning and shared understanding across the organization, and the cabinet member is not exempt. I'll also submit to you that when the cabinet leans in, all you're doing is building content. We always talk about curriculum development and content creation. When the cabinet does its work, you're building that content that you can go out and share in a very, very meaningful way. Thank you for those words of wisdom. Thank you for being with us. And you'll get to hear more from Dr. Lance as she leans into the panel discussion. But right now, we have Dr. Art Mccoy. Give it up for Dr. McCoy.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to jump right in. It's so good to be with ThoughtExchange because so few thinkers exist that I coined the work we do and I do as being warriors. We're warring against ignorance and we're warring against apathy. What is ignorance and apathy? Well, I don't know and I don't care. I don't know is ignorance and I don't care is apathy. And so the point is, if you do the work that we're talking about, you're warriors against ignorance and apathy because we know and we care. What do we know and what do we care? I don't call it DEI. I call it DIE. And I'm going to spend 5 minutes and it's 12:23 and where I'm at. So that's Central Standard Time. So I'm going to 12:28 and we'll stop. But the point is DIE is diversity, inclusion, and equity. And if you don't have it, you die. Your business dies, your district dies, your career dies. We got to educate as if our life, legacy, and liberty depends on it because it does. If nothing else shows this, it was the last election where you have the famous two numbers, 51 and 47. 51% see the world one way, 47% see it another way. And the point is we're divided. We need bridge builders, regardless of which side you're on, or if you believe in there being more than one side. Some people feel like it was homicide for one candidate, suicide for another candidate. Both people died, homicidal and suicidal. When you're doing this work of DIE, your system dies if you don't address it like it is. And frankly, being a warrior, you're dying as you're leading because it's sucking the life force out of you. But that's all right, because that's what some of us were meant to do, and that's why some of us are here. So I am a sitting superintendent, more than 10 years of superintendency. I've been doing this work of dismantling oppression since at least 2005. And Brother Glenn Singleton is like my literal brother. We were doing it together on the West Coast and other places. And so I give a shout out to him because we work hard and we do what we do. But the point is, I want to give you some very clear things. Everything my previous beloved brothers and sisters said, Dr. Teresa and Dr. Carpenter, is right on point. So I'm not an echo. I won't repeat any of that. And I'll give you tips, tools, and techniques if you ask me, but I'm going to give you what's on my heart right now. So the point is, first, how do you do this? You have to say, I see you. In everything you do, whatever position you have, I don't care if it's teacher, custodian, superintendent, which is just the custodian of the whole system. Don't ever be so arrogant to know that you're not just a custodian. You're only a custodian. You're just cleaning it all up and taking good care of it. So whether you're the custodian doing the sweeping with the broom or the custodian from the C-suite of CEO, I must be the one who says, I see you. What does that mean? I is for inclusion. Because if I wasn't included to the table, if my high school principal didn't tell me at 17, 18, Art, if you ever need a job, just call me. And I had my bachelor's by 19, and that's all cool. And I had 70 credit hours by 18, so I became a certified substitute teacher in Missouri at 18, the youngest in the state, certified teacher in mathematics secondary at 19, the youngest in the state. And that's why I'm able to retire. And I did announce my retirement at 43 because I'm going to be free at 43. Not retiring from the mission, but only retiring from the position. See, I'm just retiring from the position, but never the mission. Now I'm free, I'm bought, and I'm boss. But what does I see you mean? It means inclusion. It means sensing what's there beyond the outer me, what's on the inner me and you and me. What's the intersectionality, as Sister Kim Crenshaw defined from the feminist movement and the women of color. what's the level of empathy? The E in see you, I see you. I is, again, inclusion. S is for being seen and sensed. If you can't see it, sense it. And then the E is for empathy. You know, if you walk the walk and you experience the experience, you have the empathy. But if you don't have the empathy, then at least engage with me any way you can. Engage with others that aren't like you. Engage. And then lastly, the U in I see you is, if you can't have empathy where you have experience to understand, because you may not have walked the walk that Brother Carpenter, and you may not have walked the walk of Art Mccoy, you can at least seek to understand. You must say, I see you. And then after you see me and see others, you have to say, I support you. On a humanitarian level, how can I support you? And ultimately, you are sufficient. And if you aren't sufficient, then together we can be sufficient. See, what is intersectionality about? It's the fact that there is a commonality in our pain. And any of us that have experienced pain, we have a commonality. So the point is that if you can find the points in your life where you've had pain, you can connect with those who are creative veterans of suffering. That's Martin Luther King's term. See, I say in COVID, welcome home. Because now white people who are privileged are creative veterans of suffering like me, subject to random acts of violence, insecure, unstable employment, looked at upon and treated like you have a disease. Step to the other side because I can't get too close, 26 feet to be exact. That's been the lifestyle of some people, indigenous and people of color. If it doesn't kill me, it makes you blacker. What doesn't kill you makes you blacker, because there is a worldwide understanding that we have to do something about this. And that thing is called oppression. So what will I say? What is equity? I call it DIE. I talked about diversity. That's more than the out of me. That's the enemy. I talked about the inclusion, engage me at the table. Now, what is equity? Equity is what love looks like in public amongst strangers. I don't need a law, and I really don't need you to love me or hate me. And I don't need you as leaders to tell everybody you love the opposite. No. What you have to do, because there will be no law that forces you to love anyone or forces you to stop hating anyone. But what you do need to do is have the person be empowered to have their own power, to not need someone else's love. If you can make them sufficient, if you can help empower them to see their self-sufficiency, and then if they are not sufficient, then we are sufficient until we can get there on those basic needs. Because we have to replace the I, the me, myself, and I, the I that creates an illness in our society, with the we that makes wellness. If you remove the I in illness, and add WE for we, and we are sufficient, then you get wellness, the beloved community. So whatever you do, just make wellness, eliminate the I-ness in the illness, and that's systemic, and that's situational, and that's individual, and create we for wellness. So what is equity? Equity is what love looks like in public amongst strangers. That means that it is meeting the needs at the speed of the need. Because if my need is met and your need is met, then I don't have to ask you, do you love me? Or can you stop hating me? I just leave you alone until you're all right. And then we can come to the table together to talk about what we want versus fighting about the scarcity of what we need. So it's now 1 minute after. I'm going to stop. I got millions more to say, but I just want to say welcome home, because I'm a creative veteran of this thing. And that's why we opened up and stayed open during COVID. And then when everybody else was closed down and we were open, predicting that November, December would be worse, I shut it down and gave my people some time to rest. White, blacks, and others, they're at home doing virtual learning and making sure that they're safe when our hospitals have zero capacity at this time right here in the St. Louis. And so I ultimately say welcome home, because this is what we do. We have to collaborate. We have to communicate in real time. We have to be confident. We have to be competent. I'm a certified contact tracer from Johns Hopkins, and I'm on the board of BJC, the hospital, on the governor's task force leading COVID openings and closings and so forth. But ultimately, we have to be community learners and community leaders, calibrating at all times to the situational leadership that it demands. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to these questions and discussions.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Dr. McCoy. I see you, I support you, and you are sufficient. I've heard lots of definitions of equity, and they all matter. But what love looks like amongst strangers. What love looks like amongst strangers. Meeting the need at the speed of the need. Thank you, Doc. We're going to turn it over to Kai. We're going to kick off an exchange. Let's do this, Kai.
Wow. Okay. That was really powerful. Thank you, folks, so much. Let's take a minute and we're going to join a thought exchange because I know that there are some burning comments, questions, and a lot of excitement in the group. So I've got my screen shared here. I think everyone can all see it. What I'm going to invite you all to do is actually join in and be part of the conversation. And we're going to use this to delegate the questions for our panelists. So if this is your first time, how you can join is by just holding your phone up. You don't have to take a picture, just open the camera and you can point it at the QR code and you'll be able to enter the exchange. Another easy way is to just jump onto a browser, tejoin.com, and you can enter the 9-digit code that we have up on the screen here. And then the final way is Drew has posted the link in the chat, and you can just click on that and join on your device as well. So we've got these 3 ways here. I'm going to give it 4 minutes, and during that 4 minutes, I'm going to attempt an exercise in quiet leadership, where I invite you to take some time, input a thought, try and rate as many thoughts of others as you can, and then we're going to discover the results together. So I'll start the timer and invite you all to participate. So I'm just going to switch screens so we can see the interaction in live time. Again, I invite you all to take this 2 minutes and really share some of the thoughts and questions that are on your hearts and minds. We still have the link in the chat for you to participate. I see some beautiful thoughts coming in here. I think this is a really rich conversation, so I'm going to add another 30 seconds here. So I'm going to give you this time to finish the thought that you're working on. You can share as many thoughts as you want, but we'll finish that up in the next 30 seconds and then try and move into the rating thoughts where you can actually consider and learn from the thoughts of others. Beautiful. There's a couple of latecomer thoughts. So I encourage everyone to now try and move into the rating stage. Try and rate at least 15 thoughts of others. And we're going to take up this conversation in just a moment.
Killing it.
Okay, folks. So I'm going to close the exchange now so that we can have a look at the results together. And there's some really powerful words in here. So I want to start by centering ourselves in the first thought that has been rated by all of you. And before we jump in, I just want to note that in 4 minutes, we heard from 35 participants, shared almost 40 thoughts, and the interactions, the learnings that you had between each other constituted by data, we have almost 500 ratings, 500 moments where you've considered a perspective that might not be the perspective you came to this conversation with. So thank you and a lot of gratitude for that time. So what has come up for us is this question of what is the best way to get people who think that there's not a problem to see that there is. Dr. McCoy, when you talked about how we're building this bridge and how we're actually recognizing this 51 versus 47, what is it that is helping us recognize that there is a problem, and how do you as leaders express this? And I'm going to turn this over to start us off with Dr. Carpenter, and then we'll pass it through, and I think we can have everyone on the panel weigh in here.
Yes, the best way to get people who think there is no problem to see there is a problem. In public education, we've been applauded, we've been celebrated, we've been successful when we have immediately given answers and solved problems. If there's an issue in the district, then you solve for it with a solution. That's celebrated, that's applauded. This is an issue that's been with us since some of the founders of K-12 education said explicitly that the public school experience wouldn't be for everyone. We've been fighting an uphill battle ever since. So to answer that question, I say, we have to do the messy work of finding out what's in the hearts and minds of the human beings that you share space with every single day. And I'm talking about the adults. That's adaptive, that is messy. Dr. McCoy mentioned Glenn Singleton. He has one protocol, there are others, but a protocol matters. A way to have that conversation matters. And to have that adaptive conversation, Singleton would say that you need an organization that's willing to get into some tough conversations and stay engaged, experience discomfort, speak their truth, and expect and accept non-closure. So how do we have a rich conversation that's more about the questions than it is about the answers, and get everyone in our organization to stay immersed in that conversation? That's the work. Because you're right, there's a polarized divide right now. But we have to find out what's on the hearts and minds of the people in our organization. And then once we do that, we normalize. Singleton says we normalize social construction in multiple perspectives. So we honor the perspectives of others, and we also say anything we do organizationally, it was socially constructed, so it can also be deconstructed. And then we work together in our most powerful way to deconstruct systems that are so oppressive in nature. Thanks for that question. Anyone want to add to it? Dr. McCoy, Dr. Lance.
Sure, I got stuff, but I'm gonna yield to my sister. Go for it.
Sure, I would say data doesn't lie. And I know sometimes folks don't want to pull out the data, but the data is what it is. So if you have inequities that exist in your data, then you use that as your entry point. And then when we talk about protocol, one protocol I like to use is the ladder of inference. So let's not instantly just jump to conclusions about how we fix it, because oftentimes we look to fixes that are outside of our realm of control. So as an example, we have a disproportionate number of African-American males who are placed in special education, in particular, our ED, emotionally disturbed. So if I share that data, I would pose the question, why do we think this exists? And if folks start pointing outside into home life and low income families, I'm going to bring it back and I'm going to say, let's look at what's in our realm of control. And I'm going to continue to pose those questions until folks start pointing the fingers at themselves. And then I think collectively as an organization. The other thing I would encourage us to do is not get stuck. In other words, let's not get stuck on the folks who aren't ready to move with us, because that'll bog you down physically, mentally, and spiritually. And that was a lesson that I had to learn a long time ago. Not everyone is going to be on a train with you. So you can't move at their pace. You got to keep doing the work. So two things. One, the data doesn't lie. And then two, don't get stuck. They're not with you. Keep it moving.
Yeah, let me jump in. A lot to say. Give me 3 minutes. I want to play with politics for a second. Some people are optimists. They say it's going to get better. Don't worry about it. Just keep on doing it. Some people are pessimists. They say, it's all hell's breaking loose. It's going bad. But we must be the thermometers that changes the temperature. I say that in light of Donald Trump, who ultimately, he controlled the narrative before the election and said it's going to be rigged. Then after it happened, he said it's rigged. And then now he's still saying it's rigged. So when you use the data, you must understand that people bring value to the numbers. And so if you don't get to the value that the person has, then the numbers won't even help because people embed their values in the data. That's my only point. And so when that happens, what you have to do is do a systems analysis. I use it in 5 Ps. There are partnering people. There are power people. Partnering people are people who just do what you want when you say it, and they partner with you. They have the same values and so forth. Power people are people who have power. They may not have the same values, and you'll feel it. They'll hurt you when they have to hurt you, and they'll help you when they have to help you. Passive people, people who don't see that they're part of the problem, don't understand, they're just chilling. They're on survival mode. They're just passive. They're not plus or minus. They're spectators. That's what you're talking about. And then there's poisonous people, people who are coming at you at the wrong way. Their values are totally out of line, and you know it's not right. What do you do as a leader? If you're the superintendent or the CEO or whatever, if you can't change people, change people. If you can't change their heart, change their body, move them to another place that they have no power in that space. Secondly, you have to understand in this power analysis that we are all baited. When you got to that district, you got to that position, there were problems. You've been set up in a situation that you're being baited. So there are baiters. Very quickly, what does baiters mean for me? On the positive or on the negative side, baiters are backstabbers, abusers, imposters, takers, exploiters, and wreckers, people who are reckless. That's the word baiters. On the positive side, there are believers and belongers, people who give access and assistance, people who are informed, have insight and do inclusion all the time, people who take the time to know what was said, to have a meeting before the meeting. Who are the players? How can we do this right? Then to have a meeting after the meeting. Like this organization did when we did this. They wanted to meet before the meeting. It's like, all right, they're on the positive side. They take the time. They form teams. They give equity and empowerment. They're resilient, they're respectful, and they're reliable. They're reliable, they're reliant. So now, if you don't have someone who sees that they're the problem, and you have millions of feet on the street, young people marching saying there's a problem, don't settle for small change. We want big bills and big action. So if you can't change the people after all of that evidence, then just change the people.
Wow.
That was powerful. And I think that all of these comments actually lead us really strangely into what I want to thread together here. So I just want to highlight this. Extremely powerful. Equity is what love looks like in public amongst strangers, meeting the need at the speed of the need. I think that this, for me, really ties in the ICU and Dr. Lance, that we can't do this work alone. And when we're thinking about power and folks and how they come in and show up as co-conspirators, I want to take us into this question of how do you choose your partners and your co-conspirators? Being respectful of everyone's time. Just a quick check. We've got about 5 minutes left. So I'd love if everyone can quickly give their thoughts to this piece here. I'll turn it over to Dr. Carpenter to start us off.
Absolutely. So I would suggest that you don't have to choose co-conspirators. Co-conspirators will choose you. Co-conspirators will choose you. I can think of every organization I've worked in with an equity focus over the course of the last 10 plus years. The co-conspirators found me. I'll use this phraseology to try and help. In any organization, there are three types of people. And the first type is I have to people. Everything that comes up, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do that. They're the I have to people. As quickly as possible, Dr. McCoy said, if you can't change the people, change the people. But when you notice a pattern of an I have to person, then you might want to follow his advice and find a way to change that person. And then there are the I want to people. And every organization has them. Every committee, everything that comes up, I want to, I want to, I want to. That can be positive and that can be negative. I would implore you when you're on this journey to really look at those I want to people to make sure that you can find out if it's performative or if they're on this journey for the right reasons. But the co-conspirators, they're the third group. They're the I get to people. They don't come looking for you. You hear about them. You hear about their work because they're out telling people with every initiative around eradicating oppression, inequity, and the like, marginalization. They're telling folks, I get to work on the equity committee. I get to be a part of the group that's developing the equity policy for our district. I get to go to professional development to learn more about my biases. I get to learn more about my privilege and how it's impacting my instruction. So the co-conspirators are the I get to people. Make certain that when you're listening in your organization, you're listening for the I have tos, I want tos, and I get tos. The co-conspirators are the I get to people. Anybody want to add to that in any way? How do you identify your co-conspirators, Dr. Lance, Dr. McCoy?
Yeah, I'll just say I agree wholeheartedly. You know, when I arrived in U46, I didn't go looking. Folks really just sort of sought out. It was almost, we're so happy you're here and how can we help? And I was looking for those individuals to follow up in action, and they've done so. They don't get paid to be a part of the equity committee. They don't get paid to meet with me after hours. And so these are the individuals who, like you said, that third group, I get to. And I think you just need to be aware and cognizant of who's in your circle, because you want folks in your circle who are going to push you and challenge you, but they're also flowing in the same direction as you.
I agree. I defer to those perfect answers. Perfect. Ditto.
That's beautiful. We're coming up at about 10 more minutes here. So I'm going to thread 3 of these together here. So the next 3 questions are really asking us about some tangible ways, some tools, and how we can actually even utilize ThoughtExchange to help inform and make progress on this. So what I'm going to weave together and pose to all of you is, what are the concrete ways you can speak to ThoughtExchange specifically, if that resonates for you, of how this has supported your work, and how you can actually give us some examples of how this has worked for you. So it's going to be these 3 thoughts. We're thinking about tangible tools, examples of ThoughtExchange, and examples of instances in specific. So I'll turn it over to Dennis here, and we'll get into the nitty gritty. And this will be our last piece, and we've got about 5 minutes to close us up.
Absolutely. So if you kind of leaned into the conversation, the rich conversation we've had so far, cadence matters. And Dr. Lance talked about coming in and asking the right question. And this series of 3 questions, everyone's getting the same question. Questions matter. Mindful inquiry around a topic like diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism, it matters. That is a part of your cadence. Oftentimes we want to get to the work, but it's important to begin with the right questions. Also, engage in as many voices in answering those questions as possible. I can tell you a misstep I made during one of my superintendencies. I had the honor of serving in a couple of districts. But I went into a school district and the board members, of course, hired me. I messed up my cadence right here. So this is a part of your answer. And I wanted to get started on my entry plan prior to arriving. And I didn't really know a lot of people in the community. So I asked the board members, who should I talk to? And I asked them each to give me 3 people. Well, what I learned about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people into that process is I was talking to the same person. They were just different people. Because that was the power structure in the community. That wasn't the voices that I needed to hear from most. Those were the individuals who the system worked for. They knew how to leverage the system and make the system bend toward their needs. So a tool like ThoughtExchange, like I said, I brought them into my cadence, but probably too little too late in my last role. It allows you to hear those voices at the fringes. It allows you to hear those voices that are oftentimes marginalized and they have never seen the system bend toward their needs. It's important to hear those voices sooner than later if you're going to stay ahead of the work, because now you have, once again, content that you can turn around and face the community with and say, I understand this truth, but there's also another truth in our community, as expressed by the single mom who lives in X neighborhood who shared this thought with us. That's an important part of your cadence. So make sure that you're hearing those voices that are oftentimes left in the fringes or in the margins. Great question.
Yeah, I'll just add that this idea about staying ahead of the equity work, when I think about cabinet, because that's really, I'm really going to emphasize this notion with the board, the superintendent, and cabinet. So I use that to keep that conversation going. So the superintendent sets the agenda, but the superintendent will say, do we have any topics for the agenda? So I try not to let a week go by that equity is not on that agenda, because I don't want it to get stale. I want it to stay fresh in our conversations. When we visit schools, so we visit schools virtually in these data reviews, if there's no pushback or critical conversations and questions around the inequities as schools share their data, then I will pose those questions. And that's how I continue to keep the work around equity fresh. You think about George Floyd, how many, or Black Lives Matter, it starts to go away because it gets stale to folks. You know, at March and April and May, it was on fresh on everyone's mouth. And then you saw it start to scale back. So you got to keep that conversation going, especially if you're in a DEI role or you're the superintendent and your board starts to lean back a little bit. You got to keep the conversation going every opportunity that you get. So how do you leverage ThoughtExchange in that venue? Because I had ThoughtExchange in my previous district, I know the value that ThoughtExchange brings. So when you talk about race and racial injustices and oppression, really difficult conversations for folks to have. It can be very sensitive. But what ThoughtExchange does is it allows you to respond to questions in a very anonymous and safe way. And so just like you did here, Kai, we are able to share our responses, rate the thoughts of others, and see what's emerging from there. That data piece in and of itself provides a leverage point, an entryway into beginning the work. And so I think if you don't have ThoughtExchange, I would encourage you, because oftentimes you see folks do surveys like these Likert scales, but you don't get the true testimony and a commentary behind how folks are really feeling. So I would encourage any opportunity that you can talk about this equity work, that you make sure that it stays fresh, because DEI roles, they can go away. You heard me say, prior to June, there was a 60% decrease. And then we get a 50% increase. So it's just a matter of a board or a superintendent saying, we got a budget cut. We don't need the DEI officers anymore. So you got to keep this stuff fresh in people's minds and hearts.
Yeah, I'll jump in, pick up on that, never being an echo. So not repeating what anybody else says, I want to share that you have to be a do tank, not just a think tank. And speaking is doing. So getting thoughts exchanged is essential. Because if you have a democratic system in order to exchange thoughts freely, then you are being a do tank way more than most think tanks, which get a specific expert to say something that's common think. The exchange of multiple views is the do tank. Then beyond the getting the views out there, now let's talk about concrete things you have to do. If equity is what love looks like in public amongst strangers, then get your people among people that are strangers to them and see how much they can love them. That's why as a school system in the multiple districts I've created 2 hospitals that we own and operate to give all healthcare to all children before Obamacare, but then even afterwards when church was being challenged. 2 homeless shelters to give housing to any students to eliminate and reduce the homelessness because we had homelessness issues. And we created two hope houses is what we call it, houses of hope, because they have a shelter over there. And our students built them. So we gave them jobs too. Every kid gets a job. We were a promise zone where there was underemployment, so every kid gets a job as a part of an earning and learning program. Earn and learn, registered apprenticeships with certified credentials and pay like $20 an hour and even $25 an hour, which is as much as my teachers get paid for after school work. My 18 and 17-year-olds get that. 2 grocery stores that we built, own, and operate because 1 out of 5 people were hungry. Get to doing. How do you make the equity work concrete? If there's a need, meet the need at the speed of the need. I had that as a challenge to myself, that my system needs to change within 24 hours for a critical need and within 48 hours for a semi-critical need. Not a board meeting, not a month. The power structure will give me the power as the superintendent to act as an emergency situation to move at the speed of the need. 24 hours, that's what you got, because it's about life and death. So as much as you can see the need, get to doing. That's concrete. I raised $1 million a year as a benchmark since 2005 because I don't ever want to raise taxes in the communities I work with. They don't have the money. And so that $1 million was too small. I can raise $5 million a year right now, raised over $25 million because I never want to raise taxes. The need was you need some fresh dough to make a better sandwich and sometimes a better education than need needs. And so get to doing. That's concrete.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lance, Dr. McCoy, and Dr. Carpenter. In the spirit of concrete and becoming do tanks, I love that piece of knowledge, and meeting the need at the speed of the need. We've got some next steps for you folks, for everyone who's joining us today. So a couple offerings for you, and we're going to follow up with resources here. So the first piece is that we actually have what we call a masterclass, and this is specifically on how to run diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism exchanges. There's a lot of great thought leadership that has gone into this, and it's a chance where you can come and you can actually explore, how do we have these conversations? How do we build the exchanges? And how can you take meaningful action on those results? So the next one that Drew has just posted in the chat is on Monday, December 7th. It's 11 p.m. or 11 a.m. rather Pacific time and 2 p.m. Eastern time. The second piece is furthering our diversity, equity, and inclusion virtual event series. Is our next session, which is on December 16th. And this is to actually learn and work on establishing a working definition for equity and using that to perpetuate and propulse us through the journey. So we're gonna send a link for you to join us in that event. And I know that we now are wrapping up here, so very grateful for everyone's time. And I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Carpenter to say our goodbyes and wrap up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kai. You rock, and the team behind the scenes. I cannot forget Drew and Amelia and the work that they get to do to make certain that our events go off without a hitch. Dr. Lance, you killed it. Dr. McCoy, you killed it. Always. Congratulations on your retirement. Thanks to all of you. Lean in, ask us questions, ask us anything you need to know here at ThoughtExchange, and we want to be there as your diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism support system. We're here. Thank you for what you do. Have a great, great week.